Now 5 o'clock. I would like to call Development and Services Committee for July 26, 2022 to order. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Pugh,
Here.
Teratio,
Here.
Barron,
Here.
English,
Present.
Newton.
Yes, here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to item number 2, it's the adoption of the minutes from the June 28th, 2022 meeting.
Move to approve the amendments from June 28th. Second.
And properly moved in second. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Pugh,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to item number 3, adoption of the minutes. Madam Clerk. I'm sorry. The adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
So,
Mr. Chair,
yes, ma'am.
before we adopt the agenda, I would like to add to our agenda under maybe if we make this item number 7 and adjournment number 8, and that is to add an item to cover other items to discuss some verbiage and language that we received that we need to clear up in some of our motions and on our agenda.
Can I get a second for that motion, please?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Newton.
Well, the vote, yes.
Yes. English,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Pugh.
Yes, we do not want to call the roll again.
Motion approved.
All right. Items for action. Item number 4. I'd like to make a motion that we defer this item to our next committee meeting.
Second.
Been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll? Call for the vote.
Pugh,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you, ma'am. On to item number 5 on our agenda, items for discussion. I would like to recognize Councilwoman Newton.
Thank you. Mr. Pugh, would you like me to read the motion into
Yes,
the
ma'am.
record? I move to direct the county attorney to work with the county administrator to research and draft an absentee landlord ordinance. The ordinance should provide potential remedies for individuals who violate county ordinances and provide via supplemental documentation a comprehensive review of the legal impacts potentially associated with the adoption of such an ordinance.
Are there any updates from staff on this item?
Mr. Chair, I believe Ms. McLean from our office and the Assistant County Attorney, Mr. Eric
Jensen.
They've been working together, and I believe that the changes that need to be made, they have. So I think they just have to actually just draft those changes, and that'll be it. It'll be ready to go.
Thank you, sir. More questions from my colleagues?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So if I may address the attorney, do we know, or ACA Jensen, do we know when we'll have those changes to us?
Mr. Jensen, you're recognized.
ACA Jensen for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It says it's on. Okay, one test. How about I just speak? Okay.
Bingo.
I'm going to stand back a little bit then. Okay. So the answer is we will start drafting the language. Now that we know the general parameters, we will start drafting the language immediately. I would hope to have it drafted within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, which means probably not the next committee meeting, but the following.
So you said if you are going to have the draft in the next 2 to 3 weeks, then, and council is out for the month of August, then conceivably we could have it by the next committee meeting in September.
My apologies. I forgot that. Yes, September is correct.
Great.
It would be the next committee meeting then.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a long time coming, I'm sure. Ms. Newton will co-sign on that one.
Thank you, ACA Jensen. Ms. Newton, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just for our information, so now that you're going to draft the motion, do you need an additional recommendation or a different motion from this body, or will you proceed under the original motion to draft the ordinance?
I think we can proceed under the original motion because I think that the actual changes, we know what they are. So it's really will probably not take that long to actually change. So I don't think there's any new directive that's needed.
Okay, and then just one question for you, Mr. Jensen. My understanding from the briefing document is that instituting these changes to our ordinance are essentially cost neutral for the county. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, if I may be recognized.
Recognize.
Thank you. ACA Jensen, for the record, the answer is
No.
the answer is as the county grows, we're going to have to hire more code enforcement officers, and this will eventually result in the need for more employees, but not because of the policy change, but just simply due to growth. And if the council at some point desires that that we as staff become more proactive, then that will require additional employees to do that. But just on the face of it, just this alone, I do not believe will materially affect the county.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Any more questions, comments? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Rachel, you recognize.
I just want to say how excited I am about this moving forward. I know I just got an email from the folks in Olympia who are already working with the Sheriff's Department to track residences, track addresses. And as they look forward to students coming back in the fall, I know that they will feel much more like they're going to be in a better place with these students coming back. So thank you all for your hard work on this.
Any questions, comments? All right. Moving on to item number 6 on our agenda, items no action required. Ms. Newton, you recognize?
I'm picking up what you're putting down, Mr. Pugh. Item 6A, move to direct staff to evaluate current zoning laws that permit zoning designations for large residential developments to remain in perpetuity and present options to reevaluate and or rezone these properties if they are not developed within 7 years. Recommendations should include processes to ensure that the zoning and comprehensive plan remain consistent with the lived character of the community. And then this is an item per our rules that was sent to the Planning Commission is in discussion there, and then we'll come back to council.
Questions, comments?
I may.
Yes, ma'am. You recognize.
Thank you. I still have the same question, and I don't know if I'm satisfied in my mind with the not so much the way it's worded, but with the legality of this. I want to make sure that those going forward who are purchasing land with the intent to develop understand that. And if it could be written, I guess, within that ordinance, that's just kind of my concern and my question with that.
Mr. Wright, you have any comments about?
Yeah, I guess the concern which we would have to make sure is in any ordinance that takes place is really the in perpetuity part. So we have to see if that's possible to have it where, because in perpetuity means forever, and we don't know what can happen 50 years from now, say, or 100 years. So that's the thing that we may have to consider, or at least in the language of the ordinance.
Ratio, you recognize?
I just have a clarifying question. So when we're talking about the language of the ordinance, are we talking about including like disclosure language so that something would be disclosed to the person as they're coming before us for zoning as to this particular rule, so that we're letting someone know in advance before they come before us what our rules are? Is that kind of what we're going for?
Partially, but also the fact that it is allowing a designation to be in place forever. And we don't, like I said, that we can't predict the future. So that's a concern. So we have to look to see if it's even possible for us to do it. And if it's possible, is that something that we should do?
Be recognized?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Newton, you recognize?
So two things. One is I'll address the perpetuity part first. So the language around perpetuity was not part of my motion to ask that zoning remains in perpetuity. It was rather addressing the current situation that we have, which is that if something is rezoned, it does last until something changes. So my motion was to look at the way that we treat those zoning laws now, that even though nothing is done over years, decades, eons, to evaluate that. My motion was not requesting that any zoning remain in perpetuity. And then secondly, my understanding, in part to address Ms. English, is there actually are some legal concerns around the motion and how it would work, and that the Planning Commission is discussing those. And so when it comes back, it might not, and I suspect it won't come back exactly as I wrote it, but with the considerations around our code and what the legal issues are. And so we'll have a chance to evaluate that then. I think just based on my conversations with staff, that it's not going to come to pass quite the way that I hoped, but rather we're going to be addressing the concern, which is that you have something that is zoned, and then again, decades pass, the community changes, things change, but you're still allowed, to build per previous standards. So I would anticipate that those things would be addressed as part of that conversation.
And that makes sense. And I guess that was my concern, because things do change. And when you say, it's kind of like Attorney Wright said, the perpetuity.
And that's what, my motion says, evaluate how we're currently letting them stay in perpetuity and see if there's a mechanism where we might be able to make sure that it's up to date with what the community needs. But again, keeping things in perpetuity was not my intent. Okay. It was the keeping things in the character and making sure, moreover, that our comprehensive plan was updated so that it would always make sure that things that were being rezoned matched. So hopefully that makes sense, because the perpetuity, that was my problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, ladies. Any more questions or comments? Okay. Item 6B. Looking at this item 6B, we're talking about expenditures, federal funds. Is this any reason why this is not in the A&F committee? Help me out with this one. Mr. Ratio?
I mean, I'm not the maker of the motion. Do you want to speak to that?
I wasn't going to speak to that question, but if I may really quickly, this item has been addressed within the current CDBG plan that we're going to be reviewing for us tonight. So I don't know if ultimately you were going to ask if we could send it to another committee, but it's been, that language has been adopted. And so my understanding is that this item has actually been resolved, but I will let staff and our attorney speak to that.
And if this matter has been resolved, then I'm not sure if the motion could be, I want to say, taking
Mr. Brown.
So to be clear, the item is addressed in another area, but I would not say it has been resolved because there has not been an approval of what staff has proposed. So just to be clear about that, the item is addressed as a part of an item that is in our HUD plan, but no action has been taken by council to agree or disagree with staff's recommendation concerning that matter. So it's still up for consideration at this point. And the item was directed to the DNS by the chair, if I'm not mistaken,
Okay.
of county
All right.
council.
And we also like to thank our colleague, Bill Malinowski, for always joining us and keeping us together here. You recognize her.
Thank you, Chairman Pugh. I'm in agreement with what Administrator Brown just said, and I was just going to add that staff cannot resolve an issue that has not been formally voted on with a recommendation from a committee meeting to the council and the council having the final vote. So while there is some language in that particular CDBG item, those are I have several questions about that, and I was waiting for that till it came up to a discussion item here in this committee before we act on anything like that. So I'll just wait until it gets to your action items. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I do see a discrepancy here. We will not be meeting on July the 30th. Mr. Brown, can you help me out with that date that needs to be?
Yes, sir. That should have been August 30th, which would be the council meeting that's already scheduled.
Who you recognize?
So following up on what Mr. Malinowski said, I want to try to use correct language here. So the motion that I wrote was that we update our policies. What is before us tonight in our HUD plan is a proposal from staff that would, once approved by council, constitute our policy. Is that the correct interpretation of how those items intersect?
I'm going to say yes, in the sense that updating the policy, well, let me be clear. The county, as the council, did not establish a policy.
It was just a practice.
So staff implemented a practice in order to utilize HUD funds, which was important. We needed to do it. So council has not established a policy for how this will work. And that's what we need council to do.
Thank you. So said another way, because you're correct. There was something that was happening by practice, but not by policy. And so I was trying to have us address it by policy. And so at the moment that council approves our HUD plan, whatever that says, at that point, that would then be the official policy adopted by council.
Correct.
Okay.
All right. I recognize Miss Sarah that's joining us on Zoom.
Thank you. Sarah Shire, Community Development Division Manager for the record. I just wanted to clarify a few things surrounding this. I don't believe that this was ever a county policy that excluded the unincorporated areas. After doing some research and communicating with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it's come to our attention that we are required to notify the incorporated areas that they are able to opt in or opt out from participating in these funds. We just received the instructions for urban county qualification from HUD. And so we are in the process right now of drafting letters to each of those municipalities that will give them the option to be included in CDBG and then by default, the home funds. So it is not a restriction that we have put in place. This comes from the federal government.
Thank you, ma'am. Any more questions? I'm sorry, Mr. Malinowski, you recognize?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on what Ms. Shire just said, that's what I'm looking for, is to find out what we actually have written in Richland County that we are using in acting on the distribution of these funds. And now she's saying that there's some other information that we're either getting or have gotten from the federal government that dictates the use of those funds. And she's talking about opting in, opting out. That's the information that we need to be provided so we can see that we may be discussing a matter here that is not within the purview of council or staff to actually be making any decisions, excuse me, because it's already a decision that's been made by the people giving us the money. So we need to have that information before moving forward with any of this. And I'd appreciate if it would be disseminated to us, because that could eliminate a lot of the questions I have about this particular motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Wright, you recognize?
Yes, and just to answer your initial question, because this is both an item that deals with both development and expenditure, it actually could fall into either committee, A&F or DNS.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions or comments? If not, let's move to item number 7 on our agenda, which is other items. Ms. Barron, you recognize?
Thank you. And I will do a brief overview and definitely yield to Attorney Wright on this item. But it's been brought to our attention that council members cannot direct staff to do anything. And so in lots of our motions, we move to direct the county attorney, we move to direct staff, when essentially there are only 2 people that we can direct, and that is the administrator and the clerk's office. So in several of our motions, even some that we covered today, I would like to make a motion that we direct the clerk's office to clean up any of our motions that will allow for the proper verbiage being used. And so that's my motion. And I'm sure hopefully I'll get a second, then Mr. Wright can give us a little more background.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk, can you call? Is there any discussion?
Let me ask a question before the attorney addresses it. And
yes, ma'am.
So, point well taken, but I guess where I would have some confusion with what you just said is about the county attorney who does report to us. So I don't know why we wouldn't be able to direct the county attorney.
Well, I definitely will allow him to speak to it, but based on what was shared with us, it's all based upon ordinance and rules, not necessarily our rules, but other rules. But I'll defer to Mr. Wright.
Yes. Well, first of all, there's actually in the code which says the council and its members shall deal with the administrative services solely through the county administrator, and no member thereof shall give orders to any county employee or subordinate of the county administrator, either publicly or privately. So that's in the code. In the rules, it says that there are 2 officials that serve council. That's the administrator and the clerk of council. And as far as directing, it lists the actions that can be taken, the legislative actions, and one of them is direct the administrator to bring the item back for action at a specified committee meeting. And like I said, the code specifically says that council can't direct staff to do anything. And it's specifically for attorneys, and this is not just a county thing, it's a general government thing where they like to have a certain level of separation for the attorney to be able to advise or make decisions that sometimes the county council or any governmental director, for example, may not agree with. So that's what that's for. But this is actually in the code and specifically in the council rules.
Okay. And I guess from my perspective, I'm totally fine to comply with that. But it said that we couldn't direct staff that reports to the county administrator, and you don't report to the county administrator. But if someplace else in our rules,
no, it's any county staff, and it specifically says anyone that reports to the administrator. So it's not just people that report to the administrator, it's any staff.
I'm totally fine with that. I just wanted to be clear.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going back to my ABCs and back to first grade. So if you would just bear with me, please. This would be great to know in our onboarding when we come on. But when you say direct staff, like I call Mr. Bill Davis, and I say, hey, Mr. Davis, I've got this person. Can you help me?
Yeah, you can talk to staff. You just can't say, do this or direct in like a meeting where we have the motions. You can direct the county administrator or you can direct the clerk of the council, but you can't direct, say, Bill Davis to do anything. You have to direct the county administrator to do something that he can get Bill Davis to do it, for example. So yeah, that doesn't mean that you can't speak to the employees or even ask questions. So you can ask, questions of them and maybe for updates, but you can't direct them to do something.
But can you clarify like a directive, a motion in that regard?
Like for example, a couple we have that were actually on here tonight, where it says move to direct staff to evaluate current zoning laws, et cetera. That should be moved to direct the county administrator, not staff.
But we want to go back in.
Right, and that's what I guess the purpose of Ms. Barron's motion is, so that the language can be cleaned up. The problem is not directing someone, really. It's just the language should say direct the administrator, not direct staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any more discussion? All right, we have a motion on the floor in a second. Madam Clerk, can you call the vote, please?
Malinowski. I'm sorry. Hugh,
Yes.
Ratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Yeah.
Wait, excuse me. Hold on, ladies. Let's move to number 8 on the agenda. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn.
Yeah.
It's been probably moved in second. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll? Yeah. No, can you call for the vote?
Hugh,
Yes.
Ratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right, the meeting's adjourned.
Gotta get you on vacation.